right.
Ready?
I'm ready, Carrie.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Carrie Cuvion with Senate Fiscal Division. We're going to take a look at Schedule 7, which is the Department of Transportation and Development. Our first slide, number 2, this just breaks out for you the organization of the department. You have 2 main programs, that is the administration and engineering and operations. Then you see the agencies underneath there. In administration, you have the Office of the Secretary and the Office of Management and Finance. In engineering and operations, you have the engineering program, planning, operations, aviation, and multimodal commerce. And just really quickly, I won't go through all this list in depth, but just Office of the Secretary is your administrative leadership of the department. Office of Management and Finance, these are your budget and HR, fiscal folks. They do procurement and other support services. Engineering, these are the folks that engineer how the roads and bridges and highways will be built. Your planning, these are your strategic direction folks that set up the transportation system. Operations are the folks that go out and actually design, build, and sustain the highway system and other transportation systems. Aviation does what it says. It's the airports and heliports of the state. And then last but not least there, multimodal commerce. This is all other transportation type sources. This is commercial trucking, ports, waterways, freight and passenger rail, et cetera. Budget history on slide number 4. You'll see the dark blue color there. That is for dedicated funds. We're going to talk a bit about that in a little bit. We'll talk more about that. Your change from FY16 actual to recommended is about 34%. But when we take a look at the actual spending from FY16 to FY22, the change is about 14%. You will notice that FY24 recommended is less than EOB. Statewide adjustments. Top line up there shows you the existing operating budget as it was in December 1st, $768 million with 4,287 TO. When we sum up our statewide adjustments, the various statewide adjustments there, it is a negative $37 million to DOTD's budget authority. There are 2 agency-specific adjustments that you see at the bottom there. Sum all that up, you get to the 732.7, which is a $35 million reduction over EOB. But you will notice that the TO has increased by 32. We're going to talk about that in just a second, but your TO count now is 4,319. Slide number 6, these are the agency-specific adjustments. You'll notice at the top there, there's a reduction in interagency transfers. That's just non-recurred money that's for some excess budget authority that was in professional services. There's $3 million in state general fund provided for increased mowing and litter pickup cycles. That's on the state's roadways. And then the 32 TO, that comes in as the transfer of the mobile weight enforcement unit from state police to DOTD. And this is 32 vacant positions that were at state police that are going to move over to DOTD. It's going to be for compliance inspectors and police officers. And this includes all of their salaries, related benefits, travel, et cetera. And the total for that is about $1.8 million and the 32 TO. Okay, means of finance. We did say that stat deads, and not just stat deads, dedicated funds, because there are a constitutional fund, big constitutional fund in DOTD. 84% of the budget comes from dedicated funds, the largest of which is one y'all are all familiar with, which is the Transportation Trust Fund. There are actually 2 transportation trust funds. There's Transportation Trust Fund Regular, which is the constitutional state fund, then the Transportation Trust Fund Federal, which accounts for federal gasoline tax and comes from the Federal Highway Administration. So when you talk about TTF, 9 times out of 10 we're talking about TTF regular, which is the state one, but just be aware there is also TTF federal. There's some other statutory dedications.
And it's only 4% of the budget, their budget, the federal.
What's that? I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Federal TTF is only 4% of DOTD's budget. That's what the pie chart shows.
That's in the operating budget. You'll see most of the federal expenditures are going to be in HB2.
Okay.
And we're going to get to that in just a minute. I have a slide on HB2 that'll show you where most of those federal funds are.
Okay.
Okay, you have your Highway Safety Fund, New Orleans Ferry Fund, and State Highway Improvement Fund. Fees and self-generated sources make up about 4% of the budget. Interagency transfers make up about 7%, and there is a little piece of that. When we had CPRA up the other day, we talked about watershed initiative, and I said there were 5 departments. DOTD is one, but I think it's only about 40 million out of their IAT that's for that. And this is a look on page number 8 for those stat deads. It breaks them all out. You'll see the 430 million TTF regular that's in the operating side of the budget, and then 177 million of TTF federal that's on the operating side of the budget. The TTF federal is projected to increase by about 6.3 million, and TTF regular projected to decrease by about 4 million. These are based on REC estimates. There's no change in the other 3 funds. Slide number 9. This takes a look at comparing the budget at the enacted FY23 level versus 24 recommended. So when you compare enacted to recommended, there's actually about a $9.4 million increase. That's about 1.3%. Program-wise, the administration program decreased by about $1.5 million. That's about 2.7% from enacted to recommended. Engineering and operations increased from FY23 enacted to FY24 by about 11 million. That's about 1.6 million. Means of financing wise, state general fund dollars increased by about 3 million. That was for the mowing and litter pickup that we talked about. Interagency transfers decreased by about 4.9 million, and stat deads increased by about 11.3. The TO positions you see there, that was for the weight scale enforcement that we talked about. Okay, just to put it all together that we've been talking about these numbers, this pie chart shows you the total DOT budget, and you see operations makes up about 66% of it. That's your largest expenditures are going to be in, or that's the largest budget authority is in operations. It's about 480 million. Engineering is about 18%, that's 132 million, and you'll see planning is about 8%. All the other offices are 6% or under. So this is our total pie. The next 2 pies, we're going to break out our 2 offices, our administration and our engineering and operations. So slide number 11 breaks out the administration program. You see management and finance makes up about 76% of that budget at about $42 million. There are 201 TO positions associated with this, the administration program. Slide number 12, this breaks out engineering and operations. It has about 678 million with 4,118 TO. Obviously, operations out of this program is the biggest at 71%. Engineering about another 20%, and planning at 9%. Aviation and multimodal commerce are roughly the same in size at about 2.5 million. Okay, slide number 13 just explains to you what the various expenditure categories involve, and we show them to you on slide number 14. Senator Barrow, you had a question earlier about personal services. Usually when you have a large department like this, or like DEQ, or you'll see corrections, et cetera, when they come up, they tend to have most of their expenditures in personal services because of personnel. It's people actually performing services. So that's how it's set up in state government. In some agencies, like when we had CPRA, they had a whole lot of other charges. That's or in Public Defender Board, the money was coming into that office and going back out. Like in CPRAs, it's going to construction projects. Public Defender Board, it was going back out to the district defenders. But in this case, for DOT's operating budget, this is where the money goes to. About 59% is in personal services. So out of that personal services category, you'll see salaries. That makes up about 36%. And then related benefits, about 24%. Professional services is also a large category in DOTD at about 10%. Your other charges category is also about 10%. And interagency transfers are about 8%. All right, we will move along to slide number 15. Our total state employees over 34,000. DOTD is about 11% of the total state employees, so it is a large department. The number of funded but not filled positions in February, on February 27th, was about 346 personnel. We take a look at our historical chart at the top
Where were
right.
those positions mostly at, those 346?
I'd have to go back in and dig that up for you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have that. We just have the total. When we just ran the total by department.
Yeah,
So I'd have to see from where in the department they were coming from.
okay. Do you have any idea?
Oh, yeah, it's mostly in our operations group.
I know we've talked about operations. I understand private world operations. What's operations for you?
Operations is primarily our district offices. We have a small headquarters office as well that's in the Office of Operations, but it's mainly the 9 districts. And so in those districts, we have all the maintenance crews, which is a lot of people, and then we have all the people that administer construction projects, inspectors and project engineers and such. And so that's where the vast majority of our vacancies are. We have a lot of turnover, particularly in the maintenance units with mobile equipment operators. Our starting pay is only about $12 an hour, and once people get a CDL, they tend to move off to the private sector because they can get much more money than we offer. So it's a recurring problem that we have with turnover in the district maintenance crews.
I understand that on the lower end. Tell me about the higher end. Tell me about the engineers and architects.
In regard to engineers, we're having a hard time recruiting engineer interns, people that just graduated, they don't have a license. We want to bring them in, we want to train them. After they get some experience, they get their license, and then they tend to leave. But we're having a hard time even getting them in the door now because the private sector is offering so much more money than we offer. We have a special entrance rate, I believe it's about $56,000 per year for an engineer intern, but the private sector is offering sometimes $20,000 or $30,000 more per year than that for people to start straight out of college. So it's a difficult issue to deal with.
Yeah, but when you figure in the health benefits and the retirement, some private sectors don't offer that kind of package.
Well, the retirement benefits have been changed over the years. It used to be, when I started, it was you could go 30 years and then you could go 3 years on the drop and then you could retire. Now you cannot retire until you're 62 without taking a penalty. And so it's a lot of that incentive has been taken away. It's still a good retirement system. It's still a defined benefit program, which is really good. And it is nice to have the health insurance and the health insurance beyond retirement, but it's difficult to get a young person to think about that. And so it's I'd be happy to talk about it. I don't want to spend a lot of your time today, but we have an issue, I think, all across state government, and certainly in DOTD, with maintaining a career staff. People are retiring much faster than they should if you're going to maintain a stable career staff. And the career staff in government, elected officials come and go, appointees come and go. It's the career staff that really keeps government together over a long period of time. And that career staff is waning in DOTD, and I think all across state government. I suspect we're not unique amongst the agencies, but we're retiring people out at twice the rate we should be, assuming that 50% of the staff is career staff, and our HR department says that's probably too high. It's more like 30 or 35% of the people are career. The rest of the people are not going to be career staff. And so there's a generational change going on right now. The people that are filling positions that have been for the last couple of years and that will be in the next few years, they're top-notch people. Don't get me wrong, they're top-notch people, but at the rate we're losing career people, it does not bode well for the future of DOTD and I suspect other state agencies.
So what do? We contract it out?
Well, I think we've got to find a way to recruit more people into the department and make it more beneficial to them to make a career out of the department, out of this agency and other state agencies. The pay is an issue. Maybe some of the retirement benefits that were previously could be restored, at least part of the way. I understand why they were changed because of the unfunded accrued liabilities, and understand all that, but we've got to incentivize people to make careers of government because those are the people that really carry the agencies from one administration to another. And I don't think that's something you could contract out.
You don't think you could contract engineers and architects?
Well, you can contract a lot of the services that we provide out, but there's a certain amount of institutional knowledge that needs to be maintained within the agency, and I think that's what is in jeopardy over the long term, is we're going to lose that institutional knowledge to carry the department forward with policies, procedures, et cetera, from one administration to another.
So, when you're saying the institutional knowledge, that's the procedure by which DOTD goes by. That's not best practices and
Oh, it's best practices, yeah. I mean, we're always looking for best practices, but, you know, you need a certain institutional knowledge to know how things got to be the way they are, things that we've tried in the past that haven't worked, or the reason why we do things the way we do them now, what's the history behind that, the development of our design standards and operating procedures, et cetera. There's a whole history behind that that needs to be maintained. That knowledge base needs to be maintained within the department. We also have to maintain enough knowledge in the department to be able to effectively manage contracts. If you cannot do some of the design work yourself, it's difficult to manage engineering companies that are doing design work for you because you don't have the skill set to even know if they're doing it right or doing it wrong. So that's what I'm talking about in regards to institutional knowledge.
okay. I just don't see how the real private world does that.
Well, they have career people
Nuclear
too.
plant, or they build one of these liquefied gas units down south. I mean, the private sector does that.
Yeah, they do, but.
$1 billion project.
Yes, sir, but that company, that engineering company that designed that and built it, that oversaw the construction of that, they have career people within that company that keep that company moving from one generation to another, so they can provide those services over the long term.
Let's finish the presentation.
Huh?
Want to finish the presentation?
Yeah, go ahead, you can finish.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So these are our positions. You'll notice that there was an increase in positions from 22 to 23. I think that was another piece of the weights and standard policing was the bulk of that increase. Related benefits chart. Chart number one, number we're focused on there is the 171.9 million. That's our related benefits for FY24 recommended.
Here.
We take that down to chart number two, and out of that 171, about 86.1 is for the UAL. That's going towards UAL payment. That's about 50%. Retiree health benefits are about another 38.3. Remaining benefits, 47.6. None of it comes from general fund. DOTD, it has very little general fund in its budget, and none of it goes towards this. Other charges, benefits is zero. There are none. Your average TO salary, $55,270. And then departmental demographics, some highlights, about 76% male employees, 24% female. White employees make up about 70% of the workforce. Black employees about 24%. About 2% are Asian. Less than 1% are Indian, Hawaiian, Pacific, less than 1%, and 3% declined to state. And you can see at the very bottom there, eligible for retirement as of June 30th, 2023. So that's just a few months from now. 18% are eligible to retire as of June 30th. Our discretionary, non-discretionary breakdown on slide number 17. About 17% of the department's funding goes to non-discretionary sources, and those are the ones that we have discussed before. Things like the UAL, the retirees group insurance, and legislative auditor fees. It makes up about $124.8 million out of the total. Okay, our projection slide. You can see that based on our little purple dash line up there, we have DOTD, and this is based on their monthly budget activity, projected out at about 631.2 to end up the fiscal year. However, for when we take the adjusted budget, multiply it times our historical average that we take over about the last 4 or 5 years, it comes out about 693.3. Our supplemental needs for FY '23, about $340 million in the highway program. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. You'll see the general fund reversions there, about $1.6 million from fees and self-generated in the administration program, and about $2,300 came out of state general fund in engineering and operations. Okay, this is where it's going to get fun for us. Okay, this slide shows where the additional funding that we put from a variety of sources last year went to. Okay, so last year during the regular session, the state was proposing to expend transportation funding from a variety of sources. Some of it came from FY '21 surplus, some of it came from FY '22 excess, came from American Rescue Plan and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, among others. So the following two slides, this one and the next one, show summaries of where the various sources of money have been budgeted by the enacting legislation. So we're going to start off with the big one, which is House Bill 2. Okay, so if you look on the left column, that shows you the project. If you look across the top, it shows you the source of funding. Yes. So, yeah, so down this left side, that's going to be your project. So you see at the top is the I-10 Calcasieu River Bridge. And then you scan across, you can see it got $185 million in capital outlay, and it came from three sources. There was $10 million in P1, Priority 1 bonds, 75 in P5, and $100 million from ARPA. That's the American Rescue Plan. Go down to the next project, LA 3241. They got $28 million in P5. And so that's how it works as you go all the way down. Mississippi River Bridge, $648,000 in P1, $4 million in P5, and then your totals over on the right. Now, that gray section that's blocked off in the middle, that's the highway program itself. So it shows you the state match for P1, state match for P5. There was money in there for the New Orleans Baton Rouge Rail. There was federal grant and project overrun funding put in there that came from Rescue Plan. There was some that was not specified. I would have to get the department to elaborate on that. The Capital Outlay Savings Fund contributed about $4.2 million. The state match, State General Fund Direct, is $67.6. There's a state match for the TTF Construction Subfund, that's $42.5. TTF regular, $23.4. And then, Mr. Chairman, we talked about the federal money, the TTF federal. There's your $959 million under that TTF federal funding. Then the match on the federal.
Mm-hmm.
For which particular pot are you talking about?
TTF federal.
That's usually, it depends. Most of it's 80-20. Part of it, if you're using it on the interstate, it's 90-10, and some safety projects are 90-10, and there's just a very few categories of projects where it can be 100%, and that typically deals with signal coordination work and things like that, but it's very rare at 100%. Most of it's 80-20, and some of it's 90-10.
All right.
Okay, and then that second gray line down there just totals up your highway program. So if you see, it shows all sources, and then over on the far right, you see about $1.4 billion, 1.3.5 is your total highway program. Then at the bottom there, you see another project that was I-49 South from Lafayette to the West Bank Expressway. That one totaled up at about $232.9 million, about 233. So your grand total for everything that was in HB2 is about $1.8 billion. And it
Okay.
sums up the total, if you look on that blue line on the very bottom, that sums up each funding source. So you can just, State General Fund was about $67.6 million, your TTF regular 23.4, and so on, all the way across for each funding source.
Bodi, can you ask of the highway program?
Okay, so that's House Bill 2. That's what was in House Bill 2. We'll move over to slide number.
Of the 1.352
Highway.
on the total highway program.
Yes, sir.
On the gray. How much of that went to state highways?
State only.
Oh, state only.
State only?
virtually all of it. We do have some federal funds that are for local governments. Some of it goes to metropolitan planning organizations. Some of it are programs that we administer on behalf of local governments, like Transportation Alternatives, which pays for bike lanes and sidewalks and things like that. We do some off-system bridge as well, and we do off-system railroad crossings, and we do some off-system safety work as well. But the vast majority of that is all on state highways.
Highways, but they use it to draw down federal dollars, so they use it, some state highways don't get federal dollars.
Yeah, if you use it to draw down federal dollars, and that highway, state highway, doesn't qualify for federal dollars, what happens?
Well, we have the State Highway Improvement Fund, which is a separate fund of state money that's from the truck registration fees. So that's a separate budget category that gets used just for non-federal aid eligible roadways. I would say the off-system bridge is available whether it's a federal aid eligible roadway or not. Any public bridge can qualify for the off-system bridge. Off-system safety is the same way. You know, we can do projects even on non-federal aid eligible routes if it's safety work. But for the most part, as far as maintaining roadways that are on the state system that are not eligible for federal funds, we use that State Highway Improvement Fund.
How much is in there?
Well, we bonded part of it back in 2013 and it did projects over 3 years, and we receive about 35 or 40 million a year comes in from that we can actually use on projects. Debt service on that, I believe, is 21 million if I'm recalling correctly. So on the bonds that we did sell, is 20-year bonds. But the remainder that comes in cash that we can spend, I believe, is about 35 or 40 million per year. Maybe a little bit higher than that, actually.
Just under 40 million.
Just under 40 million, yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna ask you something, because this is probably the most important block to most of the people on this committee.
Yes, sir.
This is the one we get the most pressure from. I'm gonna ask you to submit to us all these different pots of money, how they accumulate, what the balances is. And I don't have to have it tomorrow or the next week.
Okay.
But I'd like it before we go into session,
Yes, sir.
okay? As well as, I see your labor numbers, but how many engineers and architects do you have?
Okay.
You know, and what percent of your budget is architects and engineers, okay?
Okay.
I'm not worried about the people in your office trying to run it, okay? All right, thanks.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that was a look at House Bill number 2. So on our next slide, there were some monies put in other funding sources. House Bill 592 was supplemental appropriations bill last year for FY22. All of this comes from State General Fund Direct. There were some projects, one there in Vermilion Parish for about $300,000. There was some to the operations program in District 3 for Highway 82. That was another $300,000. There were some port security projects at $2 million. The Opportunity Fund was at $75 million. Northern Rail at $10 million, and the FY22 match at $42,500,000. That totals up to $130.1 million. That was in supplemental appropriations. Okay, HB 406, that was the funds bill last year. This is where we move funds around, create funds, et cetera, places to put money into and move it from other sources to the other. So what it did was it took State General Fund Direct in the total of $692.5 million and moved that into other places. And we're going to walk through that. So Section 1P.
Walk slow.
Yes, sir. We'll walk real slow. All right, so Section 1P in the funds bill said take $600 million from the State General Fund and move that over into the TTF construction subfund. Okay, so you've got $600 million in there from that. Out of that TTF construction subfund, the funds bill said move $100 million of that into the construction sub-fund preservation account. So that's not, that 100 million there in the green line, that's not new. That came out of the 600 million in the TTF construction sub-fund. So don't add them up and come up with 700 million. It's 100 out of 600. The remaining 500 million went into the mega projects leverage fund. Those are the blue sections. And out of that, we're at sub allocation now, I think, or maybe sub allocation. Mississippi River Bridge got 300 million, I-49 South got 100 million, and I-10 Calcasieu Bridge got 100 million. That's in the mega projects leverage fund. Okay. Section 3A took that's the state match, the 42.5, and moved that into the construction subfund. So that's that 42.5 that you saw on the previous page for HB2. This is where it came from. It came in the funds bill is how we move the money around. Okay, and then section 3D took $50 million out of State General Fund Direct and put that into the construction subfund preservation account. Okay, so the way that you read it across the bottom, you're going to see that there's 642.5 in the TTF construction subfund. You're going to have 150 million in the subfund preservation account and 500 million in the mega projects leverage fund. And you may be saying to yourself, well, those don't add up to 692.5. And remember, it's just because we did those sub allocations out of the 600 million. So when you add the 600 plus the 42.5 plus the 50, that's how you get to the 692.5.
So read those numbers again.
Okay. If you ignore the stuff in green and blue, those are your sub allocations, okay?
Okay.
So the 600 million at the top that you took out of State General Fund Direct.
Reading the white lines.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
At the top one, the 600 million,
Yeah.
you moved that 600 million into the construction subfund.
Okay.
Then you go down to the 42.5, you moved that also into the construction subfund.
Okay.
And then the final 50 million, you put that into the preservation account. So that's where your 692.5 went. Right. But out of that 600 million, just be aware that the 100 and the 500 were allocated to other things. Because the subfund preservation account, that's under TTF construction subfund.
All right.
Okay.
If I could just make a comment, if on the construction subfund, preservation account, you have 100 million and then you have 50 million, it's 150. All state legislators were invited to meet with their district administrators to talk about what those preservation projects would be, and then we came before joint budget and got those approved, that list. So that's where that 150 is, okay?
All right.
Okay. So that's what we did last session. Okay. This is what, when Commissioner Darden was here on Monday, he talked about some money that they would like to use in the this upcoming session. All right, so you have your FY22 surplus. That's your 726.5. Out of that, they would like to take 157.4, that's about 21%, and put that into DOTD. We had CPRA up here on Monday. They're getting a 157.4, and then I think some is going into deferred maintenance. That little pie chart shows you the breakout of where the division is proposing to expend the money. Okay, the second pie chart on the right over there, that shows you the FY23 excess money. It's been identified at $928.5 million. In the commissioner's presentation, it identified about $800 million worth of expenditures, and out of that, the DOTD highway program, about $340 million. If you go back to the slide we had where I talked about supplemental needs and I said highway program, this is where that money is coming from. It's coming from the 23 excess. So out of the 340, DOTD would propose to use $95 million for state match for federal programs, $195 million for cost overruns for American Rescue Plan funded projects, and $50 million for federal funding opportunities. So all that together, when you add 22 surplus, 23 excess, you get about $497 million that would be available if under this proposal.
Okay.
And that's just his suggestion.
It is a suggestion. What is the, what's our, how's that gonna fit with our cap, Sherry? You can't say, 'cause
Expenditure limit.
If it, how's it gonna affect the cap? So as we discussed the other day relative to the expenditure limit, there, in the current fiscal year, there is about 400 and, I think our number right now has gotten up to about 475 million that is available to spend in the current fiscal year out of the excess that's up there, the 928 million. So there would not be enough money underneath the cap right now to spend all of that. So however, this bill moves through the process where people make, their decisions of what they want to do, you'll either come down to the 477 and only spend that amount, or you'll rearrange or address the expenditure limit cap and you'll have to increase it. Same thing with the surplus. For the surplus, there's $726 million. DOTD is scheduled to get about 157, I believe, out of that. Yes, 157. That's the governor's proposal.
yeah,
I mean,
I know.
we're early in the process. But in order to actually spend that, you'd either have to figure out a way to either spend it this year, spend it next year, move things in or out of the budget to free up room for just specifically the DOTD portion of this. The rainy day transfers and UAL, those do not count towards the expenditure limit. But as of right now, these are all just proposals that were given to us in a presentation. Bless you. So we haven't done anything with the cap yet. So all of these expenditures have to fit within the appropriation limits. Transfers to funds are not the same as an appropriation.
Right.
So if
Once
you,
they transfer appropriated out of that fund,
yes, sir,
then they're counted as an appropriation, right?
that is correct. So if you transferred the money into any one of these funds during session, you can do that. But if you appropriate it out of HB1 supplemental, HB2, that has to fit underneath the expenditure limit cap.
Okay. All right. All right, Carrie, go ahead.
Okay, so that is the proposed
Want to
use.
talk now?
I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
We only have a few more to go, Mr. Chairman. Okay, another big, I said that, but then we go into the Garvey funds. Okay. Just on Monday, so this is fresh news here. On Monday, Joint Transportation Committee approved increasing the cap on how much Garvey bond funding is allowed from $650 million to $830 million, and that was based on an increased request from the department of $180 million. And so the department met at Joint Transportation and outlined why they felt this change was necessary, why they need this excess money. It's mainly due to the I-10 widening project in Baton Rouge. That's one of that's the one on the bottom listed under the Garvey projects. They want to move the scope a little further east than originally planned. My understanding it's going to go from around the Perkins Road overpass area to past Acadian Thruway, if you're familiar with this area on the interstate. And some of it also is due to increased construction costs from inflation. So with the increased cap, DOTD would propose to add $180 million in Garvey bonds to the I-10 widening project. Now, JLCB approval would be needed to raise the cap on Garvey bonds to $830 million and to approve a proposed third series of Garvey bonds issued that would total $250 million, and that would be sometime in third quarter of 2023, I think August or September, somewhere around that area. So at Joint Transportation yesterday, DOTD reported that the first round of Garvey bonds was issued in 2019, I think at roughly $185 million. 2021, the second round was issued at $155 million. So they gave a status report on each project, and I'll just go through them really quickly. The I-220, I-20 interchange improvement in Barksdale access project in Bossier Parish, the total on that project was $80.5 million. That one is done. It is completely, all the Garvey bonds have been expended, the project is complete. So I'll mark that one in green because it's good to go.
Which
Okay,
one?
the top one, the I-20, if you look under where it says status of all 4 Garvey bond projects as of March, that top one there in Bossier Parish, that one is done. Okay. The I-10 Loyola Drive interchange improvement in Jefferson Parish, the project total was about $166 million. As of March, $133.9 million has been expended out of the $138 million in Garvey bonds that were issued. Okay, other funding was part of the project total, but $138.8 million came from Garvey. $133.9 million of the Garvey has been expended. The expected completion date on that one remains as fall 2023. So that one should be later this fall. That one should be done. There's LA 23 Belle Chase Bridge and tunnel replacement. That one's in Plaquemine Parish. That one totaled $181.3 million. All the Garvey bonds that were issued for that project have been expended. They were about $17 million. And construction is still ongoing with that one. I think they expect completion around February of 2025. And then the one at the bottom, that is the one that has really just started to get underway well here in the Baton Rouge area. That's the I-10 from LA 415 to Essen on I-10 and 12 Project East Baton Rouge. $925 million project total. Expected completion sometime around 2028. This is the project to which DOTD would like to add the $180 million in Garvey bonds. I believe a total of $415 million in Garvey bonds has previously been programmed for this project. 34.9 has been expended. And then the breakdown there just shows you this is a multi-phase project. It's very complex in terms of what portions of it are going to be completed when. The railroad bridge over Acadian Thruway, that one was installed on January 15th, that overpass bridge. I think that portion is close to being done. It's close to being done. The College Drive flyover is currently ongoing, with an expected completion date of November of this year. There is what's called the I-10 mainline segment 1 of phase 1. That would go from Washington Street to the Acadian Thruway. It has a revised estimated cost of $850 million. I believe the department, this is based on the testimony from Monday, in addition to the $180 million in Garvey bonds, $255 million in Federal Infrastructure Investment Act funds will be added. The preliminary work is underway on that section. If you notice, when you're driving, you'll see the barricades on the side of the road have gone up. So that one is on the way. And so that's the Garvey bond update.
All right.
Okay. We're going to switch gears and just quickly look here at the Transportation Trust Fund. This is a history of the fund going back to FY16. The thing to note here is the flat from FY16 to FY22. It's only increased by about 0.8%, so about 1% over that time period. Our debt service. This shows you the debt service on the time program and how it eats into the 16 cents. So for FY23, for the current year, the debt service amount is approximately $160 million, okay? And out of that for FY24, that's that box in the middle at the top, it says $41.8 million for time debt service will be paid out of the 16 cents. And originally, when time was originally proposed, it was going to be self-sufficient. It was going to pay for itself, but that changed in fiscal year 09. If you go back that far, time debt service was $4.1 million out of the 16 cents. That was the year that the debt service had to start being paid out of the 16 cents instead of the 4 cents. And if you go all the way out to FY43, time debt service is projected to be about $94 million out of the 16 cents. Of course, a lot can change between now and FY43, but this just gives you an idea. This affects how your 16 cents can be used because you have less of it. You have $41.8 million less to spend on other things. I like to put this one in every year just to give you all an update. This affects highway construction costs, and it's why states are looking for additional money and why money has been put in on the federal level through things such as the Infrastructure Investment Act. If you start back in 2003, the index was started at $1. and it measured how the construction costs changed over that time. So if you go from 2003 to 2022, that's an increase, I think, of about 155%. It was 2.55 in June of 2022. So I used yearly averages here because this chart was getting kind of crazy. So basically what it means is it would have cost $2.55 in June 2022 to construct the same project that cost $1 in March of 2003. And also you notice that kind of kick in the tail over there in 21 and 22, how it's really spiking up. That's affecting all the construction costs in the country. I'll just end on two things here that the legislative auditor produced. Back in September, they did a report on the TTF, and their findings were very similar to what the department has testified to before, that the TTF has not increased since 1990. It's not indexed for inflation. Also, what we just talked about with the debt service, that's bullet point number 2, where the debt service associated with time is cutting into the 16 cents. They also looked at higher fuel efficiency and electric vehicles that are affecting gas tax revenues because buy gas if you have an electric car. And then they talked about how other states are looking at alternative funding measures to fund their transportation system. The report on the right, that was a supplemental report that was submitted after a task force meeting. So just putting those out there for your information. And then lastly, the legislative auditor's report on the Act 461 report. These are just 2 items that they had in here for DOTD. And that concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
I'm going to go back. I'm going to follow up on something you said about
Yes,
the
sir.
time and all. And I see it's in the back of here from the audit, from the auditor's audit report on Highway 3034. And I know I've talked to you, I talked to Sean, I've talked to everybody for 15 years. That 1 mile of clearing and grubbing and putting in some sewer work.
It's what they're all
You think 4 years was reasonable for that contractor?
No, I don't, but that is a problem that we're really not an organization that's skilled at sanitary sewer work.
Well, let me ask you this, why'd you bid it that way? And not only that, but you come back and bid the widening, and you put the sewer in the widening. And nobody bid it but the same knucklehead that took 4 years to clean and grubble it,
Yeah, I realize that.
you know?
Yes.
I don't understand how that happens. If
Yes,
you
sir.
worked for me in private world, I'd fire you.
Understood. Yeah, but as you know, we're addressing that by working with city parish, and we're gonna let them handle the sewer work, and then we're gonna come back and do the road work.
As I told y'all before, I don't have enough political life left to worry about that project no more, you know?
Okay.
So,
Our District 3 Administrator, Eric Dauphiné, is here.
So I did a rough count about the engineers, that asked about the engineers in the district. Counted 43, rough. I could go through and just, staff level, we have 3, 5, 6, 7 of us. There's 9 project engineers in the 9 parish offices, construction offices. There's 13 assistant PEs in those offices. We have 3 bridge engineers, 2 lab engineers, I think 7 engineers in our design office, and 3 engineers in traffic.
all right, got another question. We'll probably go a little while. I hope y'all understand this is not personal.
Yes,
So
sir.
we get beat to death about DOTD and roads, okay, and bridges, literally. I quit going to church because they beat me to death at church.
Yeah.
Or I don't go as often. If you listen to just this meeting today and just listen to your section, and you see how many millions and hundreds of millions and billions that your department gets. It's like, how the hell are we talking about a $150,000 overlay for a mile? Is a big deal. If you do that time 8, each district does 1 mile, that's 1.2 million. In the scheme of your budget, that's not a big deal. The DOTD budget, not the district budget. So that's what frustrates me in particular so much, and I think these other members, because they talked to me about it. I don't know all the answers, but I know part of the answers is gonna be, you're gonna have to, DOTD is gonna have to start contracting some stuff where you don't have all that overhead. Well, you let somebody else worry about parts of it that you don't specialize in, and you get your niche and do it. I know my first term in the House, I had North Livingston. I got all my state roads. I had North Livingston, North EBR. I got all my roads in Livingston in 3 years overlaid, probably 30 miles. I got I-10 widened, I-12 widened, $100 million projects. You know how many projects I got done in the last 11 years as a senator? Completed? 0. There's something wrong with that picture. That's why I'm so frustrated with DOTD, and I raised so much hell. I went from fixing every problem I had when I was in the House to where I ain't fixed one yet in the Senate. So I'm just telling you what I'm thinking. Senator Abraham, it's hard for me to, when you come up there and you need this money and this money and this money, to me you say, is that the best expenditure of our state dollars? Senator Barrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate you guys being here today. I have heard some of the comments made today, but I would do share in some of the frustration with the chairman, especially with some of the roads that are in my district. You know, I got one lit, I don't even know how many, it wasn't a mile, it may have been a quarter of a mile. And I was told that was all that they had money, some money that they needed to expend, and they decided to do part of Plank Road. I'm grateful for that. But I have to tell you, when I look at some of our state roads, especially in my district, District 15 in Baton Rouge, Scenic Highway it's just deplorable. Going up near where the Comey Diversion Canal is, I can see some progress, but the rest of that is very raggedy. And oftentimes, I try to avoid having to take that road because of the damage that it can do to my car. I am extremely frustrated about some of those highways and have talked about them and have brought them up in terms of highways that needed overlaying and to be redone in terms of state highways. Plank Road, again, I think it might be a quarter of a mile, but it's so much more. Scenic Highway, Airline Highway, Greenwell Springs Road. As a matter of fact, I called Josh one day because I couldn't believe turning from Jewel onto Greenwell, there were cones immediately in the right lane, and there was no signage there to tell people to be careful, watch out, it turns into one lane. I mean, just an accident waiting to happen. There's just some things that I really just expect more, expect better. And so, again, you know, I do share in some of that frustration because we have not been able to see the level of work or progress that I would have liked to have seen, especially in my district, on those highways. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I'll convey this to most of the members on this committee, and several of them own businesses. Several of them been around a while. They feel like DOTD is specifically too top heavy. They're not getting the money down to the districts. They're not getting the money out that needs to be spent on the roads and what needs to be done for the people of the state of Louisiana. That's their feelings, I'm just telling you. Okay? That's all I got. If anybody else wants to say anything, go ahead.
I'm the DA at the table that's been at the position the longest, and so I guess the one thing I would say is, look, I understand and appreciate your concerns, because just like everybody else, we're taxpayers here too, and the biggest challenge that frustrates me. Look, I know all these district engineers, all of them are very passionate about what they do. They're dedicated career employees. And I believe that people don't get to be the point where they've got, you know, engineering degrees, master's in degrees, trying to be leaders with their people without the desire to want to do a good job. The biggest frustration for me, Senator Womack, Senator Cloud, and I know Senator Bernard's in the back of the room, and I feel like we've established good relationships. And look, I do everything I can to try to accommodate everything you ask for, and I've got the calls from you, I've got them from the public and the constituents, and that's my biggest frustration when I go home at the end of every day is trying to do the best job we can every day with the resources we have. And so as much as Senator White, you desire, you know, those things, we desire them too. And a lot of days, every day, we have to make tough decisions about where we utilize the limited resources we have. But I can just assure you, we try to do these guys at the district level, we try to do the best we can every day.
Thank you.